Welcome back to another episode of Heads and Tails, and this week I'm delighted to have Bill Watkin on. Bill is the CEO of the Sixth Form Colleges Association. In other words, he's in the corner of 500,000 16 to 19-year-olds in this country. His authority is immense, and the work is of immeasurable value to the future of the UK. Born in Middlesbrough, he studied French at Bristol University, which clearly put him in good stead for a 20-year career teaching foreign languages. Amongst other things, Bill then joined the Specialist Schools and Academies Trust, which we know of as the SSAT, which helped to implement the government's academy programme. We're going to hear more about that today. Bill is a kind man. He's also a mover and shaker of education policy in the UK. It's such a pleasure to have you on. Bill, welcome to Heads and Tails.
Thank you, Walter. Lovely to be here. Good morning.
Wonderful morning to you. So let's start from the beginning. As you know, we're all about mentoring at Oppidum. We believe every child should have a mentor. You've had a distinguished career. Can you pin that on anyone early on in your career who helped you or who was a mentor to you?
I think not officially a mentor, but I think I've had some role models who have been really important to me in my career. The first of them was probably the head of modern languages in what was at the time called Hartcliffe School, which was a school serving a very disadvantaged community in Bristol. And the head of modern languages was called Richard Eon. He was a Frenchman, and he was absolutely inspirational in terms of pedagogy, but also in terms of relationships with young people and the importance of building those relationships outside the classroom as well as in. So he was a really big deal in my formative time as a teacher. The second person who has probably been the biggest influence on me in my professional life is someone called Leslie King, who was the head teacher of a huge secondary school called Stantonbury Campus near Milton Keynes. And she was my director at SSAT. And having made the transition from being full-time working in schools to being essentially an office worker, I needed someone to guide me through that transition, and she was the person. And she has a really deep moral code, hugely competent, fiercely intelligent, and just a lovely person to work with. And then my third and most recent I suppose, role model has been my colleague James Gewin, who is Deputy CEO at SFCA, and he's been in the sector a couple of years longer than me. And he has a wonderful way about him, both in terms of a humorous, intelligent, and sensitive human being, but also an absolutely determined and committed and passionate professional.
Humorous, intelligence, and sensitivity, I think, two key attributes to any good mentor. Jeremy, or James rather, or Leslie, if you're listening, then kudos to you both. You then went to Bristol, where you studied French. You then moved after that into a career teaching foreign languages. Perhaps an anecdote from your early time as a teacher. I'd love to hear one of those.
Well, my first job was in London, in southeast London, in a school that was called a social. That was the nature of the school was described as a social priority allowance school, which basically meant you got paid a bit of danger money, an extra boost to your salary, because the situation was not an easy, comfortable one, and so I had a number of interesting experiences. As a new teacher in an environment like that. I remember one day a girl came into school with her arm wrapped in a bandage and came to my lesson, and the bandage was clearly not professionally fixed, and I was asking her about it, and it transpired that she had a sharpened screwdriver under the bandage, which she described as a splint to help hold her arm in place. I think probably she had other intentions for the sharpened screwdriver during the course of the school day, but no, it was a very interesting environment in which to learn the trade, and it was one of those typical things where we say, well, if you can't manage here, you won't be able to manage or if you learn the trade here, you'll be able to manage anywhere. So that was an interesting introduction to my work as a professional, very different from my kind of family background, and which might have prepared me for a rather different sort of teaching experience. So I should explain, my dad came from kind of a military background, and his parents were based overseas, and he was sent as a 4-year-old to lodge with Miss Villiers, who had a boarding house on the Kent coast, and his parents every now and then, like once a year or something, would write a letter from India. Anyway, he one day was called in by Miss Villiers, who told him that his mother had remembered his birthday, surprisingly, and she had managed to procure some tickets for the circus. And he was so absolutely thrilled as a 4-year-old, not only that his mother remembered him, but more importantly, had managed to get some circus tickets. And Miss Villiers put the circus tickets on the mantelpiece in the living room. And another day shortly after, Miss Villiers had a visitor who kindly brought a box of chocolates for her as a house gift. And my dad, being a 4-year-old, and I should say I take after him, enjoyed the odd chocolate, and went in one day and saw this box of chocolates and helped himself. And when Miss Villiers called the boys to her and said, "Who's taken one?" he quite cheerfully put his hand up and said, "Well, I did." And so she took the circus tickets off the mantelpiece and she tore them up and she threw them in the fire. So it was kind of a quite tough, but a very different tough kind of upbringing. And my dad, who inherited that kind of thing, would put me on a train at Paddington Station and sent me off to Shrewsbury at the age of 7. And we were kind of reading Livy's Punic Wars from a very young age in Latin. And so to experience a very different kind of life as a teacher was great. I loved it. I was more at home there, actually.
Two definitely tough moments. I'm keen to reflect on that within the context of teachers learning the trade today. As you know, more than anyone, there are comparatively very few 21-year-olds demographically in this country, let alone joining the industry. Perhaps you could reflect in your position on the context of which teachers are now joining the profession and what needs to be done to make it even more of an attractive place to work.
Yeah, I think we did a piece of work on this. I suppose it must have been about 15 years ago now, when there was a teacher recruitment shortage at the time. And we tried to understand what it was that brought people into the profession and what it was that was most important to those people who were considering it as a profession. And it wasn't actually salary and terms and conditions. What was most important to young people considering it as a route was the moral purpose, the enjoyment of the job, the sense that you were making a real contribution to society and making a real difference to the lives of young people. And that was a much bigger draw than obviously wages were important, but so when we talk today about workload and wages and terms and conditions, it's important. Clearly, it's important, but it's also really important to talk about the sense of purpose and fulfillment and enjoyment that you get from doing the job, and you're doing something really worthwhile.
I agree. I think the sense of identity is huge, particularly in young people coming through. You talk about terms and conditions there. Perhaps I can ask you one specific question on a particular growing term. Is the introduction or discussion around a 9-day fortnight, giving teachers 1 day off every 2 weeks to, as it were, go to Glastonbury or go to Wimbledon. What's your view on the 9-day fortnight?
I'm not really one for working from home, which is, I know, not the answer to your question, but it might set out a little bit about what I think about that. I think if you can organize your timetable, if you've got the capacity and the resource and the space or timetable into fewer than 5 full days a week, then as long as learning is happening and outcomes are still successful, I can see there's an argument to defend it. But if you can condense things, are you actually putting more pressure on the people to get as much done in less time? And the other thing I would say about it is I've known a number of part-time teachers throughout my life. And if you work a 4-day week, it is almost inevitable that on the 5th day, you will feel that you've got to do some work. And I don't know many part-timers who really take off all their non-working days without doing any work on them. So I'm not against the idea, but I would really want to be confident that young people weren't going to lose learning time.
From teachers then to students, you are at the helm of the Sixth Form Colleges Association, which, as I said in the intro, looks after almost 500,000 16 to 19-year-olds. The pressure, I'm sure, weighs heavily. It doesn't look like it from your demeanour and your clarity and everything that you do so publicly, so well. There must have been some amazing moments, and hard to distill so many positive feedback into one story, but perhaps an anecdote or two on a best moment. Was it the creation of a new college? Was it a particular story of a child? I'd love to hear a couple of stories on best moments.
I think one of the most enjoyable experiences I've had in this role is on some occasions I've been asked to go to a college to give a speech to the departing 18-year-olds who have completed their A-levels or other qualifications and are just about to head off to next destinations. And some of them, sometimes these evenings take place in the autumn. So young people have already gone and they've come back to the college for an awards evening or a leaver ceremony. And to see young people develop in that way and then to reach their goals and to share the excitement and to share their experiences, it gives me great joy, really, really does. And in fact, one of the things about COVID that I found so difficult was that generation of 18-year-olds who went off to university and ended up being almost incarcerated in a student hall of residence or something. I felt terribly sorry for them because they didn't come back, obviously, and they didn't have the kind of life formative experiences that they could share with their friends and the stories to tell. But yeah, that's probably one of the most enjoyable things for me. And I have to say as well, I should share this. This is not really I think when we were talking before and you were asking me what about the best moment in the job kind of thing, I have to say, last year I had the enormous privilege of being awarded a CBE for my work. And that was, I mean, and I genuinely, lots of people say this, but I do genuinely say that was much less to do with me and much more to do with me as part of a team and part of a sector and part of a profession that's really trying to make a difference for young people and make their lives as good as they possibly can be. But it was a very important moment. I mean, it was also quite an embarrassing moment at one point or another. I turned up in the car with the missus and a couple of my kids, and when it was at Windsor Castle, and I turned up, and there was a wall of armed police officers standing blocking a black gate through which I had to pass to get to the castle entrance, and one of them came up with his machine gun to the driver window, and I rolled the driver window down, and he said, morning, and so on. And he said, could you just open the bonnet and pop the trunk for me, please? God, we've got a very elderly relative, and the trunk was absolutely full of tenor pads, incontinence pads, which was a slightly embarrassing moment, but not quite as embarrassing as he said, now could you open the bonnet? And I've had this car for 2 years. I'm absolutely rubbish at cars, and I had no idea how to open the bonnet. And so after fumbling around for a little while, he reached in and he said, can I help you, sir? Anyway, it was,
Bill,
the day got better from that point.
I thought you were going to say that your elderly relative was in the boot of the car.
No, but yes, no, she wasn't.
Well, congratulations for a richly deserved reflection of your work. We're towards the back end of this episode. There's questions on recommendations, which we're going to come to, but I would like just to, as I've got you here, get your sense on the university climate. Universities are becoming, the sector is changing. Higher education is changing for sure. There's questions around the value perceived and the costs rising, and the options away from perhaps more formal university life. You mentioned that was lacking in COVID. What is your view on the university landscape? Where do you think that will go? Do you think British universities have the same brand value perhaps that they did 20 years ago?
I think it's the brand value is under threat for various different reasons. I think at the moment they are absolutely extraordinary places, and they need protecting. We need to hold on to them. It's a fantastic asset in the country, and most aspirational families will want the young people in the family to go to university. What they do at university might be flexing, as in higher level technical qualifications or apprenticeships and so on are viable alternatives, and universities have got to be involved in that. But I do think that, we still want to make university the campus for those people who want to be in a professional career later on in their life. That training of the brain to learn. It's not necessarily what you learn when you're at university. It's the capacity to go on and on learning. And I think university is very useful for that. I'm not saying it's the only way of acquiring that, but it is a very useful way of acquiring it. In terms of the debt that you accumulate as a student, I totally understand that is a concern, a deterrent indeed for lots of people. But I do think that the evidence that suggests that your earning potential as a graduate is higher enough more than non-graduates, that debt is something worth considering very seriously.
Perfect. Lovely. Okay. Towards the end then, I'd like, Bill, if you could, to tell our listeners one book, one film, or one podcast that you'd recommend.
Okay. Well, I've gone for professional books. I mean, I read all the time, but I thought I'd recommend a book that is to do with work rather than leisure. And in fact, I've struggled between two of them. One is written by Major General Paul Nansen, who was the boss at Sandhurst, the Officer Training Corps. And he wrote a book. I mean, apart from anything else, I just love the title. It's called Stand Up Straight. And you could almost imagine a Sandhurst general saying it. Actually, it's about how your leadership should reflect your values at every step of the way. And Stand Up Straight is a great one. And another book that I would highly recommend is called Expert, Understanding the Path to Mastery, which is written by Professor Roger Kneebone. And I tell you that Professor Roger Kneebone is a surgeon. You might see how apt his name is. He was a surgeon many years ago in South Africa, and he was working in the townships of Soweto, dealing with knife crime and so on. Very difficult life. And he's come back, and he's now working at Imperial College in London, teaching doctors how to become surgeons. And he says, and this is something that I absolutely fundamentally believe in education, that it's not enough to specialize in a science or an arts discipline. You need both. You need creativity as a doctor, as a surgeon, And so he gets all his wannabe surgeons to learn a different trade, like lace making, tailoring, dancing, pottery, because he says the creativity associated with solving problems in a traditionally creative discipline is hugely important and transferable to the world of the surgeon. So take an operating theatre where you've got a confined space, 24 people moving around, all carrying sterilized equipment, must never bump into each other. He says it's like a dance. Or take the dexterity required to make fine lace, and imagine transposing that to fixing up someone's insides. So I think sometimes we encourage too much specialization, and I think Roger Kneebone is a fantastic advocate for remembering the need for a variety of skills.
Perfect. That answered my next question, which was around, well, it says an unpopular question on my notes here, but I think opinion rather, but I think that's a fairly popular opinion. So I'm going to go with that one as that part of the question. To finish, Bill, we have lots of new or aspiring teachers who are keen to join the sector, and we haven't even touched on all the academies work you've done. You look after so many children. You've been recognised for your work. Is there one piece of advice perhaps you'd leave our listeners with for those looking to join the sector?
I think what I would say is try always to be creative, innovative, to do something new and set yourself a challenge. But always remember that you might get it wrong, and it doesn't matter. Just be prepared to change your mind. And I think sometimes what we see in the public domain is that changing your mind might be perceived, or people worry that it might be perceived as a sign of weakness. But I think if you try something out and you then realize that it was the wrong thing to do, you should have the confidence to change your mind and do something different instead.
Wonderful. Well, for those parents who are listening, the sixth form route was not something on my radar aged 14 or 15. And Henry and I have come to see lots of your colleges, and our minds have been changed too in the huge value and the increasing value that the colleges have. It would have been a place where I would have loved to have gone, and I wish I'd explored those options as well. So thank you for all the work you continue to do. I know our listeners will have loved listening to you. For those who don't know more about the SSAT, do go and check that out. Bill, thank you very much for being on Heads and Tails.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, Walter.